So what do we talk about in mid-June? It's not a whole lot going on. But we're going to do our best, folks, to drum up some kind of content here in a very, very warm late spring here, at least in the Deep South. Now, I don't know where you are, but I know here where we are in the heart of the Deep South, it is a scorcher everywhere you go, every single day. There's like no break, and this is just what we have to deal with here. We should be used to it by now, right? We should be used to it. And we're not even to summer yet, and look, if you know that if it's in the 90s and maybe possibly near 100, at least for the heat index, you know when September comes. And those 11 a.m., 12 p.m., noon, 2:30 p.m., 3:30 Eastern games are played. You can just imagine what it's going to feel like at the stadiums. Well, what are we going to talk about here on the show? This is RideAlong Sports, by the way. After a pretty big hiatus for doing these live shows, we are live here on YouTube. We're also going to be in podcast format wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Spotify, that's Apple Podcasts, and anything and everything in between. So today, we're going to look at the mid-June outlook. We're going to look at the landscape of college football currently, and probably most importantly, this little antitrust litigation. And I know at this point, this is kind of old news. It's been around for a while. Late May, we got a lot of information with this big proposed settlement, revenue sharing, and that whole plethora of things. We're also going to talk, just a little bit around that. We may touch on some college football playoff stuff as, 12 teams, that's coming this season. We may talk about that a little bit. And if we get to it, we're going to look ahead to some games next year. Some game times were released. The SEC, through their new partnership with ABC, ESPN, since CBS is out of the picture, ESPN can, they're the only ones. I mean, they can put out game times 2.5, 3 months in advance now because CBS doesn't. There's nobody else to get first dibs on these games. So they released some game times. We'll talk about some of them. We'll run through that list later in the show. And again, if you like what we're doing here at RideAlong Sports, like and subscribe, and let us know what you want to hear. If you happen to stumble upon this video, if you happen to stumble upon us here in podcast format, let us know what you want to hear from us, and we'll do our best to oblige. My name is Brandon Taylor, here on Monday, June 17th. It's a Monday night, and let's get right into it here. Let's not waste any more time. I want to talk about this big, huge settlement that's been in the news for the past few years. The NCAA has really been put in a vice, and that's stating it lightly. They've had power for a very, very long time, and their power is dwindling rapidly, it seems. You've got this thing with the transfer portal, which the NCAA hasn't helped in any of this. They haven't helped improve any of this. They haven't helped, they seem to be kind of hands-off, really. And with the transfer portal, there's nothing they can do, really. But the NIL, there's nothing they can do with the NIL. Because the government said, hey, NCAA, you have no grounds. You cannot prevent players, college athletes, student athletes from getting paid for their name, image, and likeness. On the concept of it, that sounds great. Hey, yay, good for you. Now, I want to just say this at the preface, because I don't know, you may not know me. You may have never seen me ever in your life. You probably haven't. But I want to start by saying I am for athletes being able to be paid. I am for student athletes to be able to profit off their name, their image, their likeness, their hard work, everything that they do for their university that they play for. I'm a proponent of that. Okay, I want to say that on the front end here. However, even I think some of this has gone too far, and we should have expected it. We should have expected this, and I think the majority of us did expect it, because we know how college sports has always been. This amateurism, which honestly, the thing about amateurism, it's never really been true. See, we've been fed this bold-faced lie that college sports and this amateurism, this pureness of the sport has always been there. And that really couldn't be any further from the truth. See, there's always been financially driven, advantages in the sport. And in college football, primarily. There's always been issues with this. There's always, if you go back to SMU back in the 80s, where they were paying players, and look, they got caught. The NCAA put the hammer down. They got the death penalty. The NCAA has done what they've tried to do to prevent this kind of stuff. And they've got really silly and really stupid with it through the past, several decades. There's many examples in more recent times where the NCAA just comes down on a school for some things that really seem minuscule, but they want to make an example. But, and when I say financially driven advantages, I mean not necessarily in this paying for play kind of thing, although that has been the case, always has been the case. It's just not out in the open. It's like back when Prohibition was in place. You think everybody was, obeying that law? Oh, no, we can't drink alcohol. All right, well, I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore. I'm not going to, we're not going to make alcohol. We're not going to sell alcohol because they said we're not supposed to. It's illegal. Do you think that stopped anybody? Do you think that stopped any of these programs? But there's something else to it. It's not just the paying the players thing like that, or any kind of financial, monetary, or let's say gifts. I mean, it doesn't have to be a financial. Here's cash for your services. No, it could be items. It could be material items, any of that. But I think it goes further, because there's always been this thing where, certain schools have financial advantage. It's never been an equal playing field. Amateurism, in my opinion, makes it seem like, okay, this is everybody's got an even playing field. Nobody's getting compensated. Nobody's being financially motivated by anything. It's pure. They're playing just for the heart of the game. They're playing for a shot to go to the next level, essentially, and to get an education. And the education thing, look, it's still important, but it seems like as time goes on, players are not really that, they're not really motivated by the education aspect. Now, I say that, I'll get back to that in a moment, because I have some strong words about all this stuff when it comes to not just football, but other sports, and what it means for so many college athletes. But programs for decades, and I would say, you could say 100 years, there's never been an equal playing field. There's never been an equal playing field in college football. You see it these days with an Alabama and a Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, even a Florida, LSU, Texas, huge brand Texas. They've got all that money out there in Austin, and the list goes on there. You can go out west to USC, and so many programs out in that direction as well. But this amateurism thing, like I said, it's just a mask on over what the sport really has been for a very long time. High school football. High school football. If you want to know what amateurism is, if you want to know what the purest form of the sport is, high school football that's your game. It's not college football, even though it seems that high school football is beginning to be tainted because you're seeing states like Missouri introducing legislation that will allow high school athletes to begin receiving NIL as recruits. And that can't end well because it's kind of like this whole NIL thing to begin with. Government said, hey, NCAA, y'all can't govern that. Y'all can't tell teams, y'all can't tell players that they can't be paid. You can't force them to abide by that. That's not right. It's not constitutional. So then what did states do? States, by state, decided, yep, we're going to let our member institutions, the institutions that are within the borders of our state, we're going to allow them to pay their players. And we're going to create these collectives, these schools, or when I say these schools, you can't say these schools because the collectives are not part of these schools. They're not affiliated with the schools. That is it's like misquoted, misunderstood. The collectives are not part of these schools. They are separate entities that work with the student athletes from these schools. That's going to change here before too long. But these states said, yeah, we want that advantage. We would be doing our universities a disadvantage if we do not pass this NIL, if we do not allow our players, our schools, the players of our schools, I keep throwing the schools in there, they are not affiliated with the collectives. If we don't let our players receive this NIL, we're going to fall way behind. So here you are. And these collectives, through all these donations from passionate fans, they all do their part. They may contribute as much as $20 to $20,000 to help this cause, to help this NIL, this new NIL world, to drive it forward. The same thing's going to happen if, more and more states decide that they're going to let high school recruits receive early NIL. You're going to have another chain reaction, and then here you are. You're going to have 50 states allowing kids 18 or 17, 16 years old to receive NIL money while they're in high school. It never ends. It never ends. Because, look, if a University of Missouri Tigers, if they began to really have a visual, like you can tell they're really, one step ahead because their players that are coming into the school have already been getting paid while they were in high school, more and more players say, hey, I want to go play for Missouri. Kids in the state of Missouri, I want to go play for the University of Missouri. Ooh, I can get paid. I'm 16 years old. My parents just bought me an old beat up old car. I can get paid. I could buy me a new Camaro. Wow. I could buy me a Challenger. I can buy me a Mustang, whatever. And that money that's getting thrown out there these days, Mercedes, it's endless. You can get whatever you want. There's big money getting thrown around. What does that do to college sports, though? What does that do? Not to necessarily to college football, but what does this all do to the other sports? I want to preface that by saying, right here at RideAlong Sports, I will always be a proponent of student athletes. I will always be a proponent for college athletics as a whole. I will not sit here and say that college football is the only thing that matters. I will not sit here like some do in the industry and say, hey, as long as college football's fine, it's all good to me. I don't really care. I don't worry about those other sports. If they don't do it, if they don't do well, if this revenue sharing thing comes out and these schools have to get rid of these smaller athletic programs, hey, as long as football's okay, I'm okay. No, I will never be like that. Now, this is a show. This is a podcast. This is a brand, if you will. I use that term very loosely at this point, but RideAlong Sports will always be we cover college football. I love college football. That's something I'm very passionate about, and that's a big part of my life. I will cover things outside of the realm of college football if necessary, if there's something out there that needs to be talked about. But for the most part, college football, that's what you're going to get if you tune in to RideAlong Sports. But I will never say that college football is the most important, that so much so that is to the detriment of golf, volleyball, cross country, track and field, in certain regions of this country, hockey, and other lower end, smaller sports. Because the thing about it is, folks, it's college athletics has always been about the education, even now. Even if, even through all this NIL and everything, these students, they still have to go to class. They still have to pass tests. Now, mind you, most of these kids, they've got it pretty easy. A lot of them don't really major in anything. They do like a general studies thing, although there are a lot that actually major in, fields, whether that's business or journalism, communications, kinesiology, physical therapy sort of things. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of kids, a lot of student athletes that major in those big, big college programs. But a lot of them, they're going to class because they have to. But on a wider scale, to me, the chance that so many people, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, if we go on down to the D2, D3, and community college, junior college levels, there are so many people that because they play a sport, regardless of what it is, if it's not football, baseball, basketball, softball, if it's anything below that, they are in college, they have a chance to get an education because of that sport. They have a chance to continue to play that sport that they love, that they've probably been playing their whole life. There's passion in that. Somebody gets a chance that's recruited or maybe even walks on and possibly eventually gets a scholarship. They have the chance of getting an education. And that's a great thing. That is one of the most beautiful things about the college game is some players come from a good upbringing. Some players come from, upper middle class, high class even. But there's a lot of players that don't have it as well, that come from a small area that didn't really have much growing up, that low income. And this is anybody in any part of the spectrum. I'm not pinpointing one particular group of people. You can be anybody and grow up in any of these conditions. But college and college athletics give all those people, regardless of where they come from or who they are, it gives them the ability to get an education. It gives them the ability on the higher end, and the bigger sports, really, a chance to go to the next level and make money. And look, I understand, like, now, this is also why I do support NIL in general, because there are people that are getting this NIL. They're students that, these young guys that are getting this NIL that's able to provide for their families and able to, pay for things like early. And not everybody's going to get a chance at making big bucks in the NFL. You never know what's going to happen. You may not make it to the NFL. You may get hurt and you may get passed by. But the fact that players are able to get paid to possibly provide for their families earlier, while they're in college, I think that part's great. But I will reiterate, college athletics is very important to me, and it should be important to you as well. And this antitrust litigation that I've got this big, huge write-up in front of me about, this is setting a precedent. We talked about it, and if you want to go back on our YouTube page, you can also go back on our podcast feed back to last year, where we talked about the landscape of college football. My good buddy Zach Ainsworth and I talked about this. Revenue sharing, the future, and what everything might look like. And, the things that we feared then are continuing to progress. It's becoming a reality in this day and time. And when I hear revenue sharing, and I hear that it is something that's going to happen, that is happening, it kind of worries me a little bit. And maybe this isn't an issue as much on the Power 4 schools. They've got bigger budgets. They've got bigger athletic programs. They have more money coming in. Maybe they can afford to, abide by these revenue sharing models and still be able to keep all their athletic programs, all the way down to golf, volleyball, lacrosse, track and field. What are some more? Tennis, and on down below that. But what about these group of 5 schools? Will they make it? Anybody, and any really, even in the Power 4 schools, I fear will have to do what they have to do to be able to make this revenue sharing thing happen. Even if that is at the detriment of those programs, even if student athletes miss out on getting an education because their sport that they played all their life, that they're passionate about, is not available or is going away at the school that they attend. I just don't want it to get that way. That's what I fear. But let's talk about this antitrust litigation. So the NCAA and the Power 4, they agreed to a $2.8 billion proposed settlement. And I'm going to read something here, and I've got a lot of information about this, and I'll just read it off, and we'll talk about it. We'll try to stay on track here. There's a whole lot of information, and even I don't understand all of this. But this is what we know about the settlement so far. So this settlement, it covers 3 of the major class action lawsuits brought against the NCAA. And these 3 court cases are House versus NCAA, Hubbard versus NCAA, and Carter versus NCAA. So we don't know every single solitary detail, but what's been reported. And this agreement calls for member conferences and the NCAA to pay $2.77 billion to more than 14,000 former and current student athletes over 10 years beginning as early as fall 2025 as damages for lost opportunities to enter into endorsement deals and share in media revenue. The funds to cover the settlement will largely come from the Power 4 schools as well as from NCAA reserve funds and insurance payouts. In addition, the settlement would introduce a going forward compensation model allowing schools to share revenue with student athletes. Put a bookmark right there. We'll come back to that. The compensation model allows, but does not require schools to earmark an anticipated amount of $20 to $22 million in revenue per year to share with student athletes, and schools would decide how that money is distributed among sports programs. The anticipated revenue terms include a 10-year escalator on the revenue sharing cap with 4% increases in years 1 through 3, and a reevaluation of the revenue sharing model in year 4. Scholarship costs for schools will be in addition to revenue sharing, and scholarship caps will be replaced with roster size restrictions. That's a lot of words on a piece of paper there. Let's go back about a paragraph here. This article, by the way, is from a big law firm. Ropesgray.com is where I got this information. I figure that a law firm with attorneys that know what all this stuff means, they can probably break this down and lay it out there for somebody like me to possibly understand. But let's take a look back. So like I said, the funds will largely come from the Power 5 or Power 4 schools, as well as NCAA reserve funds and insurance payouts. I know the Group of 5 will have part in this as well, but their percentage that they have to pay is going to be lower, but it's still going to affect them. I'm not exactly sure what the deal is with the Group of 5, but a going forward compensation model allowing schools to share revenue with student athletes. That is that revenue sharing model that we've talked about. And how that's going to come about, I think it's going to be up to the schools, according to this article. It's happening, folks. So these schools are going to have to set aside $20 to $22 million every single year to pay players, essentially. It's going from what we talked about just a moment ago, NIL through the collectives. So the money goes into the collective. The players sign deals with said collective, and collective pays players in whatever form that they pay them. I'm not really sure how that's broken down, and I'm sure it's different from collective to collective. This right here is schools paying players directly. Something unfathomable, really. And if you go back far enough back into time, which really wasn't that long ago, this was like unheard of. You could never imagine this happening. Although people have been talking about, should student athletes be paid? This discussion has happened for at least a decade, because I remember back in high school in the early 2010s talking about this. And I actually wrote a paper, and I wish I could find it. I wrote a paper about student athletes and should they get paid or not. I don't think at that point I was 100% on either side. I think I did lean towards athletes getting paid. I'm not really sure what my explanation of it was. If I can find that paper, I will share it. But that was like 11 years ago. So, but could you ever imagine, if you go back 10 years ago, could you have imagined this is how it would be? Could you ever imagine, first of all, that players would be able to get paid to begin with, but the way that they're getting paid? It's kind of unfathomable when you think about it. But schools are going to have to, they're going to have to change their budgets up. They're going to have to budget for this every year. and they're going to have to save money somewhere because this is steep for some schools. $20 to $22 million. Wow. And that brings us to another topic, or another point on that topic. What's going to happen to the collectives? I firmly believe that the collectives will be absorbed into the athletic programs, the athletic departments. They're going to merge. That's what's going to happen. The collectives, for now and for the foreseeable future, will still be separate entities, but at some point, it's all going to come together. The collectives will be part of the schools, and there will be no, third party involved. Let's take a look a little bit further here and see what else we can gather from this, because there's so much in here. The NCAA, even though they're settling on all these things and they're trying to be cordial, they're trying to oblige, they're trying to do whatever they have to do to settle and not drag these court cases out, they're not exempt from future litigation. And you're going to see a lot more of this. Take a look back just not that long ago where Tennessee, after the NCAA, brought the hammer down on Tennessee and brought their notice of allegations, what did Tennessee do? They sued the NCAA. And the courts ruled in favor of Tennessee. The power for the NCAA is dwindling, folks. I don't know. There's so much here. This is still an ongoing story. And it's just this is where we are now. The sport that we know and love is changing. And that, and I've thought about this too. That somebody like myself that covers it, not casually, but very seriously, down to the minute details. This affects me, right? I care about all this. But I have to remind myself sometimes that there are a huge number of college football fans, college football viewers that only care about the Saturday. There's two kinds of people. There's people that just care about the Saturday, and there's people that obviously care about the Saturday, but the Sunday through Friday is just as important. A lot of people don't care about the Sunday through Friday. I do. And look, Saturdays will always be exciting. There's always going to be big, huge games, big crowds, pageantry tradition. That's always going to be there. We can sit here and talk about all these things, all this NIL transfer portal, players going in and out, players, you're not paying me enough, I'm going over there. Or, we had this disagreement, I'm going to go over there. And, in 4 or 5 years, you go to 4 or 5 schools. All that is part of the game. On Saturdays, regardless of what happens, the games are going to be played, and it's going to be entertaining. So, if it doesn't bother you, continue to watch on Saturdays. But you have to really watch what happens Sunday through Friday. So let's move on forward here. Enough about that pesky college football landscape. But I guess this would fall under the college football landscape. The college football playoff, as you know, it's going to 12 teams. We'll have 12 teams this year. And, I've been thinking about this. The Florida State debacle this past season, what some people are calling it. A lot of people are calling it other words that I don't want to say live here on the air. But the college football playoff is, look, I'm for the playoff too. Hey, like, am I a bad guy for being for the playoff? This is something else we asked last year here on this show. Would you prefer the pre-playoff era, or would you prefer the current playoff era? Like, would you prefer the BCS? And see, now you can. All right, listen. 2004, 2014, or 2024. If you could have one form of college football, if you could have every year be exactly like 2004, 2014, or 2024, which one would you prefer? That's the question for you folks today. Which one would you prefer? But, you know, even then, people will forget because the BCS was so long ago. A lot of people prefer the BCS. People complain about the BCS. But, you know, I have an idea. And this may be crazy. This may be crazy to you, you know, just wacko. But we got this playoff committee. And we've got these members of this playoff committee that may or may not be completely out of touch. I would lean that they're out of touch more often than they're in touch. It's been a 10-year experiment with them, and there's been some controversy. You've had them going against their own values, their own words, their own guidelines that they set for themselves. You've seen them contradict themselves. You've seen them throw out these rankings, and then they have Boo Corrigan plastered on ESPN television, you know, stumbling over his words, trying to explain, trying to rationalize and explain what they've done, when a lot of times he couldn't explain it himself. Why don't we do this? Let's do away with this playoff committee. Let's have the 12-team playoff. If we have to have a 12-team playoff, let's do this. Let's use the old BCS format. We still have the AP poll. We still have the coaches poll. Now, the BCS used the coaches poll along with computer models, right? Computer composite models. All that thing, all these analytics and math problems and statistics and this and that all got put together that determined the BCS bowls, and the number 1, the number 2 teams who would be playing for the national championship. That's how we had it for a pretty good while. And there was controversy. Yes, there was controversy. People hated it. I think people just hate whatever the new thing is because it's the new thing. And you always want something better, and then you get something better, and then you begin to hate it. So, let's take the BCS model. Let's, let's change it up a little bit. Let's have an alternate version of that. Let's take the AP poll and the coaches poll, because, look, quite frankly, the AP poll and the coaches poll, I guess they still have their place, but when the college football playoff rankings come out in November, the AP and the coaches poll are irrelevant. Let's take the AP poll, the coaches poll, and use all these new analytics and all this computing power that we have in 2024. And I've got something else to add to this, but I'll hold that for just a moment. Let's take, like I said, AP, coaches, computer models, analytics, all those things, this computing power that we have in 2024. Let's put all that together and let's see what comes out. Let's see what comes out. And we make a playoff based on that. And if you've been focusing any amount of time on social media, on the internet, you've probably heard of this little thing called AI, artificial intelligence. It is something that's rapidly advancing. It's something that's becoming a reality. Something that was in science fiction now is, quite frankly, a lot of things today or science fiction 30, 40, 50 years ago. But AI, maybe at some point you introduce artificial intelligence in here. You let them, have a little piece of the model. Let them see what they think about it. That could end tragically, but it could be interesting. Because you still have a human aspect of it, you have an analytical aspect of it, and then you have a computer, artificial intelligence aspect of it. Put all that together. Look, the sport is changing. Look at what the NFL's doing. See, the NFL, for 10 million years, has had, just like with all other forms of football, from college, high school, on down to Pee-wee, these chains, 10-yard chains to determine first down. We're in 2024, still using a chain gang to measure our down and distances. The NFL is going to experiment with lasers, with new technology on the sidelines, in the ball, to essentially get rid of the chain. A digital way of determining exactly where the ball is on the field, exactly where the first down marker is, the line of scrimmage, and the line to gain, and all those good things. Putting all that together where you don't need the chain gang, and you're going to know exactly where you are, exactly how far you are to the first down. It's all going to be handled digitally. So if we can do that, and that's gonna really be, I think they're trying that in the preseason this year in the NFL. That's going to be a reality. That's going to be something that's going to be used on a wide scale, and it's going to trickle down into college in the next few years. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. Because look, hey, the headsets, the ability for coaches to talk directly to players like it is in the NFL, coming to a college near you. If that can be done, then surely the chain can be gotten rid of in form of a new digital technology way of determining down and distance and exactly where that ball is on the field. So we got all that. Why are we relying on a group of people that may or may not have a clue what they're talking about, that are determining who's going to play for a national championship? Now, I will say this, in a 12-team format, it's honestly not as bad, because once the playoff committee determines the 12 teams, obviously the top 4 determine themselves. So really it's 5 through 12. You got your 4 highest conference champions, and the top 4 that have the first round bye. So all that's going to be determined. Playoff committee picks those 5 through 12, essentially. And then it's up to the schools, it's up to the teams to decide their own fate. Which is better, because when you had 4-team playoff like we had for 10 years, the playoff committee determines those 4, and you had 2 semifinal games and the national title. At least now there's more chance of the teams controlling their own destiny instead of the playoff committee controlling the destiny of the teams that are highly ranked. So that will never happen. The playoff committee is going to stay. And for the foreseeable future, I don't see that changing at all. But it's fun to dream, isn't it? It's fun to dream. But let's get off the topic of the college football landscape. We'll obviously talk about this so much more as the days, weeks, and months go by. But let's move on over to the SEC. They released some game times and some game windows, and they introduced these game windows. Well, I'll break those down here in a moment. But basically, if you remember, CBS, 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Pacific, every Saturday. It was a staple of my childhood, my teenage life, my young adult life, and into my adult life. hearing that CBS theme on a Saturday afternoon, knowing that the biggest SEC game of the week is about to come on, that CBS theme music, Vern Lundquist, Gary Danielson, that was then Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson, showing up on my TV on my local CBS affiliate with a visual of a packed SEC stadium and two teams fighting. Then you knew every week that was going to be a huge game. I applaud CBS. That is an era that I'm going to miss. I know ABC's got the time slot now. It's not going to be the same. And I'm afraid that it's going to be stale and it's going to look like everything else that ESPN produces, that they're not going to make it special. I hope that they make it unique, that they make that time slot special. All right. Digressing from that, CBS is out of the picture. They didn't renew for the SEC. Huge loss on their part. They're going to have the Big Ten now. So I got plenty of Big Ten jokes that I will make in the future. To save a little bit of time, I'll spare you from them now. So ESPN, they're the only game in town. They're the only TV provider for the SEC currently going forward. So as we're sitting here in June, they're already releasing game times for games months away, and these windows. So I'm going to tell you what these windows are, and this is from ESPN. This is accurate. There's basically 3 windows. 4 if you count what we call a flex. So the early window is between 12 p.m. Eastern Time and 1 p.m. Eastern Time. There is an afternoon window that goes from 3:30 Eastern to 4:30 Eastern, and the night window that goes from 6 p.m. Eastern to 8 p.m. Eastern. And there's also that flex, which basically can be an afternoon to night. So basically, if you say flex, that game could take place or could start between 3:30 Eastern and 8 p.m. anytime in that neighborhood. So ESPN has already released actual times, like set times, but they have also released windows. So basically, on the games that they've released, the windows, the game time windows, it's not determined yet exactly when the game time is going to be, but according to ESPN, that will be determined closer to the game day, no later than 6 days. So kind of how it is now, a week before, you'll know. But at least with this, months ahead of time, I know, all right, Ole Miss and Oklahoma is going to be an early game. I know it's going to be a morning game. I don't know if it's going to be 11 a.m. Central Time or if it's going to be at noon, but I know it's going to be early. Yeah. But I have this right here. We're going to take a look at it. Starting from week 1, some of these matchups. Let me move this right here. Okay, there we go. So, starting from week 1 here, from August 29th to September 1st, what stands out to me is Clemson and Georgia. That's already picked to be the noon kick right there on ABC. Miami and Florida is going to have the first 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 2:30 Central Time game. So that's what I anticipate is the CBS slot. But obviously, as you can see here, you've got an ACC team here. So it's not necessarily going to be an SEC versus SEC game, teams in that time slot, like it always has been. Notre Dame and Texas A&M. 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central Time. That is going to be hot. It doesn't matter if that game was kicking off in the middle of the night, 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m. It is going to be hot at that ball game. That's going to be a great game, and really a statement from Mike Elko on the Texas A&M Aggies. Oh boy! But let's move on. Let's see what else we got here. Week 2. What do we got here? Take a look at this. Not really a whole lot going on here. South Carolina, Kentucky is going to be that old school 3:30 p.m. Time slot. And we're starting to get into some big games. Texas A&M, Florida there at week 3 is going to be in that old school 3:30 time slot. Week 4, oh, hold on. Georgia and Kentucky, 7:30 Eastern. This is week 4 here. Tennessee and Oklahoma. See, this is where you're seeing some of these flex time slots. So you've got Tennessee at Oklahoma flex. So that game, the Vanderbilt at Missouri, UCLA at LSU, and Arkansas at Auburn are all in these flex time slots. Now you see Akron and South Carolina is night. So that means from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., that game is going to kick off. So flex, that means these bottom 4 games here can be anywhere between 3:30 to 8 p.m. So basically, that allows them to determine all those at the top there. But for these down at the bottom, it kind of, it just gives them flexibility that, some of these games, you never know. That Arkansas and Auburn game, I don't anticipate that to be great. I don't anticipate these teams to be really great, but you never know. That UCLA at LSU could be a game that gets that late night treatment. You know how ESPN loves the LSU Tigers, but I wouldn't anticipate that Tennessee and Oklahoma game. Probably either, if it's not the 3:30 Eastern, it's going to be probably 6. Like, that's just. But they're allowing themselves to be flexible. That's what this is all about. But let's move on ahead. Week 5, Kentucky and Ole Miss. See, this is interesting here. Kentucky and Ole Miss at noon. Look, that's all right. I mean, Kentucky and Ole Miss played 2 years ago at noon, and it was a great game. Ole Miss squeaked by with a victory late in that ball game. Georgia at Alabama, already slated for a 7:30 Eastern kick on ABC. Should be a heck of a game there in Tuscaloosa. You got Kirby Smart, oh man, coming in looking to continue to dominate. And Kalen DeBoer, what will their team be at the end of September? And how far will that Nick Saban shine, that Nick Saban wax on the program, how long will it last? That's a question that everybody has. Honestly, the thing about Kalen DeBoer in Alabama, that's more interesting than Texas and Oklahoma coming in to the SEC, because we know what Texas is. Texas is a powerhouse. Like, they're going to come in and they're going to be they're going to be at SEC caliber. Now, whether they win the SEC, whether they're going to be a powerhouse and just beat everybody and, fit in like they've always been there, I don't know. That's to be determined. But this thing right here with Alabama, that's really more interesting to me. Call me crazy. I'm more excited to see what happens with the Crimson Tide, honestly, than what happens with Texas and Oklahoma. Week 6, Ole Miss and South Carolina. That's going to be in Columbia, South Carolina. That's a flex, so that could be anywhere between 3:30 and 8. Tennessee and Arkansas, Auburn at Georgia. You see it there. Moving on. Ole Miss and LSU, already slated to be a night game there in Baton Rouge because, you're LSU. You're gonna be catered to. some more really great games this week here, week 8. Auburn and Missouri, that early game. That's probably going to be an 11 a.m. Central Time kick, 12 noon Eastern. That could be a good game between the Tigers and the Tigers. And also South Carolina, Oklahoma. You never know. Like, they could be on that same tier. They could be on that same tier. But Alabama at Tennessee and Georgia at Texas. That Georgia at Texas, you can already bank on that being the number one, the primetime game for ESPN. Kirk Herbstreit, Chris Fowler. Probably game day there in Austin, Texas. Probably 6 o'clock kick and all that good stuff. I could almost guarantee that. Week 9, Oklahoma. See, this is what's interesting to me. See, Oklahoma coming into Oxford and playing the Ole Miss Rebels that at this point of the season could be undefeated possibly or with one loss. And a not bad Oklahoma team coming to Oxford for the first time and already slating it for an early kick. You take a look at the rest of the games here on this week 9. Arkansas, Mississippi State, Texas at Vanderbilt, Auburn at Kentucky, Missouri at Alabama, LSU at Texas A&M. Missouri at Alabama could be okay. LSU at Texas A&M could be okay. But why are you putting Oklahoma and Ole Miss? Why are you already determining it to be an early game? Not even an afternoon game. That doesn't make any sense to me. Will be a good game nonetheless. Week 10, if you're Ole Miss, you're glad to see that you got to play Arkansas early. That's always a squirrely game. Florida and Georgia kicking off. What other time? 3:30 p.m. Eastern. That just makes sense, right? Week 11, Georgia at Ole Miss flex. So Ole Miss really, they do not have any guaranteed SEC home games like LSU does. LSU, they have a chance of having an afternoon game there. Alabama and LSU. I anticipate if there's a conference game that LSU is going to play in the daytime, it's going to be that Alabama-LSU game. I could see that being at 3:30 Eastern, and the Georgia at Ole Miss game being the 6 or 6:30 kick, the prime time. That's what I anticipate. You're going to have Georgia and Ole Miss coming in. Two teams that are going to be undefeated or with one loss, and that's going to be that. That Oklahoma and Missouri game could be great as well. That could be the later game, or it could fall somewhere in the middle. This is going to be interesting how all this plays out. And finally, let's look at week 12 and week 13 here. Really not much this week. You can see the Missouri at South Carolina this afternoon. In week 13, Ole Miss at Florida. It's always good to go to the Swamp and play them at 11 a.m., 12 noon, whatever it is, because that's one place you don't want to be at night. And there's that slate. And week 14, the Egg Bowl, obviously going to be on Black Friday. Tennessee, Vanderbilt, the Saturday early game. Auburn at Alabama, flex. So I anticipate that being a 3:30. It's usually it's been the CBS game for a lot of years. I anticipate that to continue. And you see Texas at Texas A&M, Oklahoma at LSU. Two more great games there to round out week 14 rivalry week for 2024. So this you can see as we just run through those. You kind of get a feel of what they're going with. It's really exciting to see that they've already put these games in certain spots, and I like how they did that, but they allowed themselves some flexibility, because you never know, like at this point, until you get into the games, until you get into the season, you don't know how these teams are going to be. You don't know who's going to be, a Missouri. You never know. Missouri could be undefeated, late into the year, or Alabama could be a terrible team by the middle of the season. You just never know. They're allowing themselves to have some flexibility, so I think it's all good. Obviously, some networks, I haven't even mentioned that, some of the networks there, like ABC, ESPN, SEC Network, have been announced, but that's all. That's really not important, honestly. But there you have it. So, what all have we talked about today? Well, we talked about the college football landscape. We talked about the college football playoff and how they need to change the model. They need to go to some form of the BCS, analytical mixture between the human aspect and the analytical computer aspect. And we talked a little bit about the SEC slate, the SEC game times that were announced. But that's going to about do it for tonight on the show. I thank you so much for joining us here on YouTube. And if you're joining us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, or wherever you find your favorite podcast apps, wherever you like to listen, it could be any other ones. There's so many out there. And we have it out there on all of them, or as many of them as I can get it out to. And we're going to continue this. I'm going to try to go here live on Mondays, and throughout the summer and into the season, we'll probably do more recording as we get into the college football season. Stay tuned here to the channel. We've got continued 100 team countdown. I've got a lot of work still cut out for me with that. And like and subscribe. Subscribe in podcast format on the podcast feed if you do like what we're doing here at RideAlong Sports. But anyway, hope you all have a wonderful day, wonderful night, wonderful morning, evening, and we appreciate you riding along with us today. My name's Brandon Taylor, and we will see you next time. Peace.